Phil Fish was easily the most hated game developer ever. Despite creating an extremely popular, award-winning indie game from scratch, the public absolutely despised him. That was until, in a fit of rage, he quit forever. But was he really so bad? And what made him quit? Phil's career in the games industry started soon after he graduated from the Montreal NAD's Design and Digital Art for Video Games program. That is a mouthful, but it wouldn't be long before he wanted to give up. He took his first job at Ubisoft, and later called it the worst experience of his life. He hated how games were made there. There were hundreds of people on your team, you didn't know anyone's name, and it just felt like one big sweatshop. I mean, no wonder he hated it. He was a level designer for the video game adaptation of the animated movie Open Season. Yeah, those types of games are always fun and well made. To try and not hate his life, Phil got into some side projects, like other games, and founded a yearly video game festival called Gamma. Most important of all was a game he was working on with game developer Sean McGrath. Sean had this idea to create a puzzle game where the world was 3D, but would be viewed in 4 2D points of view that you would switch between. That sounds overly complicated, so just check out the tech demo on screen. Sean would code the game, and Phil would do the art. Unfortunately, creative differences led to the two splitting up before the game could be completed. Ultimately, adding all this extra pressure and time commitment didn't help much with Phil hating his life less. In fact, it made it worse, leading to Phil having a mental breakdown during a meeting at Ubisoft, being removed from the team, and then fired. Phil soon found another job at another game development studio called Artificial Mind and Movement. But in the background, he was pursuing the previously mentioned 2D but 3D game idea on his own. He put up a post on DeviantArt looking for a programmer, and the first guy who responded, Renaud Bedard, hopefully I said his name right, was the guy Phil ended up working with. In 2007, Phil began posting about the game, now named Fez, to the TigSource forums, where it very quickly gained popularity. The first goal for Fez's creators was to enter it in 2008's Independent Games Festival Awards, or for short, IGF. As soon as screenshots of the game began getting posted, forum members were instantly enamored and wanted to see more. Over the next few months, Phil and Renaud put some serious work into Fez and managed to get a demo finished in time for IGF, even releasing this short trailer playing in the background. There wasn't much yet, but it was seriously impressive looking for a demo. Well, all the crunch time was worth it, as Fez was nominated for 2 awards at IGF. Now, IGF was held at the yearly Game Developers Conference. Phil's employers were sending many of the company's employees to this conference, but Phil was not one of them. Phil begged and pleaded with his bosses to let him go. Not to pay for his trip like the other employees, but just let him go. Either way, they still said no. So Phil quit his job on the spot, which 9 out of 10 times would be a horrible choice that I don't recommend to most people. But it paid off for Phil, because at IGF, Fez ended up taking home the Excellence in Visual Art Award. A week ago, nobody knew Phil Fish or Fez outside of a small online following, but now he was blowing up in the media. Over the next few years, Phil and Renaud continued to work on the game on a shoestring budget. They ran out of money a few times, but made it work, even getting a grant from the Canadian government. They showed a playable demo of the game at PAX East in 2011, and despite the game crashing every playthrough, it was a success. Sometime before PAX, a documentary crew had reached out asking if Phil wanted to be in a movie they were working on called Indie Game the Movie. He agreed, and when it premiered in early 2012, we got a taste of what Phil is actually like underneath. To summarize, in the movie, he seemed like a very driven and focused guy who perhaps didn't have the best social skills. In the movie, he threatened to murder his ex-partner, kill himself if he didn't finish the game, nearly has a panic attack in a hotel lobby, and tells his critics to
Fuck off!
But if you give the movie a full watch, none of these guys really have amazing social skills. Every one of them, more or less, gave up everything in their lives to do nothing but make games every hour that they were awake. After all, the only parties game developers go to are LAN parties.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
At the end of the day, I still found Phil to be a likable, quirky character who was under a lot of pressure, much like a lot of the internet thought. But that all changed when he was part of a Q&A for the movie at that year's GDC. Essentially, a Japanese game developer asks Phil, are there any modern Japanese games that inspire you, like how Mario and Zelda clearly inspired Fez? And he responds with this.
They suck. I'm sorry, like, you guys need to get with the times and make better interfaces and like update your technology. We're totally kicking your ass. Back then, you guys were the king of the world, but your time has passed. I'm so sorry.
Did you look at his face? Look at what you did, Phil.
Yeah, it's pretty bad. You can actually see this poor man's heartbreak. But if I were to play the rest of the clip, a lot of the other panelists agreed with him. But I'll admit, in nicer terms. Phil's comment itself was something a decent chunk of gamers would agree with, but how he said it turned him into a villain, and the media would run with it. The next morning, Phil woke up to hundreds of articles written about him and thousands of people screaming at him on social media. It didn't help when a lot of the articles blew things way out of proportion, with titles like Phil Fish Slams Japan. On a forum called NeoGAF, Phil's critics had created a 35-page discussion of how much of an asshole he was for what he said at GDC. Little did they know, they were about to get another reason to hate him. A few months later, Phil and Renault entered the game into IGF again, and it won again. But this time, it won the show's main award. On the same day Fez won, Phil tweeted about the previously mentioned NeoGAF thread about him. Someone responded saying, oh, it's just about some arrogant schmuck indie dev talking smack, yet has released 0 games. Great read though, to which Phil responded, I just won the grand prize at IGF tonight. Suck my dick. Choke on it. He'd continue tweeting, saying they also won 30 grand and that Fez was the first game to win an IGF award multiple times. As you can imagine, this made a lot of readers very upset. Here was this arrogant game dev getting all this attention, praise, and money for something that might not even be released, and he's seemingly gloating about it all over Twitter. Much like what Phil said to the Japanese man, the media took this story and ran with it. Now, much to Phil's haters' dismay, Fez did end up releasing very soon after in April of 2012 as an Xbox Live Arcade exclusive. It was an immediate success, with 20,000 copies being sold in the first day, which may not sound like a ton, but for an indie game in 2012, that was huge. The graphics were beautiful, the gameplay was relaxing and interesting, and the lowest review from a major publication I could find was an 8 out of 10. Even though Phil was now seen by much of the public as an a-hole, he also had created something beautiful. Fez was so good, it would go on to sell over 1 million units a year and a half after release. But it wouldn't be long before Phil fell out of the public's favor again. A patch was submitted to correct some bugs in Fez's code. Unfortunately, the patch came with a new major bug that would cause a little under 1% of the game's players to lose their save data. So, Phil withdrew the patch and planned to submit a new one. But Microsoft would charge him a fee to submit the new one. Microsoft gave developers one free patch for their games, but after that, they would allegedly charge $40,000 per patch. Why? I don't know. Probably just because they could. So Phil canceled the new patch, put the one with the major but rare bug back up, and just never fixed it. But most people just read headlines and didn't know about the fees, and just saw this as greedy developer won't patch broken game. And to be fair, if I was one of the people who lost my saves, I'd be Phil's #1 hater too. But we're just getting started. Over the next year, Phil would continue to get in trouble for his takes on Twitter. In April of 2013, Fez released on PC, and after some complaints about it, he tweeted, $9 for a game like Fez is a steal. I should be charging you $90, you fucking ingrates. Now, Fez was originally designed to be a couch game played with a controller, so there'd be no PC port of the game, because in Phil's words, PCs are used for spreadsheets. But as you just saw, Fez did later come to PC. When asked about why, Phil allegedly said, for profit.
What? Like, why would you say that?
Another great tweet from around then was when someone said that Fez's main draw was just a 2D, 3D gimmick. Phil responded with, says the person who has 0 followers. But all the hate didn't stop him from working on his next big project, Fez 2. It was announced at E3 in June of 2013 with this short teaser trailer. While the game was being worked on, Phil continued to get himself in trouble on Twitter, with perhaps his most hated tweet yet. Before I show it to you, a bit of context. Right around 2013 is when the Gamergate movement began. To keep it simple, it was a group of gamers who protested the idea of things like political correctness in video games. They wanted ethics in games journalism and wanted to protect the gamer identity from normies and bandwagoners. Their subreddit was so bad, its own creator shut it down with this honestly sort of chilling message. One of Gamergate's biggest targets was Anita Sarkeesian, a feminist critic who pointed out things like sexism and problematic tropes in many people's favorite video games. Anita had some solid points and insightful commentary, but whenever she missed the mark, she missed it hard.
I've been playing games for most of my life.
I'm not a fan of video games. I would love to play video games, but I don't want to go around shooting people and ripping off their heads, and it's just gross.
A lot of people didn't like her, especially Gamergate supporters, but Phil did, and tweeted out, Anita Sarkeesian is a hero. This tweet and his pushback against Gamergate is the one that would plant the seed that ended his career, but we're not quite there yet. In 2013, Microsoft announced that indie game developers would finally be able to publish their games on their own on the Xbox One. This was pretty huge news, as previously getting a game on consoles was both difficult and costly. Remember that $40,000 patch fee? So the media obviously wanted to get the opinions of indie game developers. Who better to ask than people from Indie Game the Movie, Phil Fish and Braid developer Jonathan Blow. Well, neither wanted to comment on it, and when Marcus Beer, also known as the Annoyed Gamer, heard about that, it just set him off. He wasn't just annoyed, he was pissed.
You should be grateful that these guys still consider what you say something of use. Me, I think that both of you are a pair of tosspots, having seen these wankers over and over again bitch and moan. Phil Fish in particular, he does come across as whiny. He's a fucking arsehole most of the time. You may make good games, well, Blow makes, Braid's a good game. Fez, I'm just not into at all.
Hey,
but I'm sorry, I'm
like
just not.
Fez.
I'm not into it. I would like to say to every outlet who got dismissed by Blowfish, fuck them. Next time they have something to shill, say, yeah, not so much interested. It is a two-way street. It's a symbiotic relationship. You guys are out there. You have to suck it up.
This was the straw that broke the camel's back. Phil went to Twitter to defend himself, saying he was simply waiting to hear more before commenting. In typical Phil fashion, instead of just defending himself, he went too far by calling Beer a media leech, middle-aged parasite, and then said, compare your life to mine, and then kill yourself. But Phil wasn't done yet. His next tweet was, I'm done. Fez 2 is cancelled. Goodbye. He went on to clarify that he didn't cancel Fez 2 because of what Beer said, but because he supposedly wanted to get out of the games industry. Either way, Fez 2 was over, and the Polytron account confirmed it with a tweet later. In this whole situation, Phil was really just trying to defend himself against Beer's comments, but obviously went way way overboard. In June of 2014, he would make the news again when he tweeted out that YouTubers playing his game without giving him a cut of the profits was basically piracy. A pretty horrible take if you ask me, but I'm totally not biased. In typical Phil fashion, he of course had to respond to people who hated this idea. Phil just kept letting the internet get to him. He would continue to go on tweet storms, like when he defended another Gamergate target, Zoe Quinn. During that event, he got so frustrated that he claimed to cancel a project he was working on, and another one. He even went as far to call Quinn's attackers essentially racists, but deleted the tweet just moments later. Things weren't looking good for Fish, but they were about to get a lot worse. In August of 2014, Phil and Zoe Quinn were both hacked by Gamergate supporters. Phil was doxxed, had his public information leak online, Polytron's website and Twitter were hacked, his Dropbox was compromised, and so on. Phil took to Twitter soon after and said, "I would like to announce that Polytron and the Fez IP are now for sale. No reasonable offer will be turned down. I am done. I want out. To every aspiring game developer out there, don't. Give up. It's not worth it." Soon after, deactivating his Twitter account. Despite radio silence from Phil, a year later, he was in the media again, when he was accused of stealing Fez from Sean McGrath, that first collaborator I mentioned at the beginning of the video. Allegedly, Fez was supposed to be cancelled when their partnership broke up, and McGrath was filled with rage when it won that award at 2008's IGF. But that turned out to be entirely false. But because Phil was seen as an a-hole and most people focus on headlines, plenty of people today still believe that Phil stole Fez. Although Phil later reactivated his Twitter account, he's pretty much stayed out of the public eye almost entirely since then. The only appearance I could really find was him appearing in a trailer for a game that he helped develop in 2016. Although I don't think Polytron or the Fez IP were ever actually sold, Phil has been done with games since then. Sort of. In a brief interview earlier this year, Phil said that he still works on games, but cancels every single one of them before they're ever announced. My guess is because he's now almost afraid of the public tearing it apart. Fez was a near perfect game, and if his next one isn't, I'm unsure if he'd be able to handle the criticism. But when it's all said and done, did Phil really deserve all this hate? Let's rewind to Indie Game the Movie. Phil says, "People say I don't care about what people think about this and that. I care about what people think. I wish I didn't, but I do. I'm a little bit annoyed by how much I care about that stuff. I wish I didn't care that much." I think this was the ultimate downfall of Phil's career. He cared too much about what others thought. This made Phil an easy target, especially when he would respond to seemingly every piece of criticism made against him. Even when someone just randomly pinged him on Twitter, no matter how dumb it was, Phil would always fire back, and always be portrayed as the a-hole. For example, let's take this Reddit thread arguing about Phil Fish's personality. Someone posts, "I've never heard of him, but look at these awful tweets he's posted. What an a-hole." 216 upvotes. The first tweet is Phil telling someone, "Please lose weight," which sounds really mean. But if we scroll down to see the context, which only has 52 upvotes, Phil was responding to someone telling him, "Phil, you looking crazy dude. Please shave." From the second Phil said what he did to that Japanese developer, it was over. He became the internet's new punching bag, and it was pretty easy to hate him when even the tiniest thing would set him off. People now hated Phil Fish, and articles that confirmed, yes, hating Phil Fish is the right thing to do, would get thousands of clicks. That Japanese developer actually later thanked Phil for what he said, because it motivated him and motivated other Japanese game creators to work harder. But nobody knows that, because that's not a story that gets clicks. Not to mention, Phil has apologized for what he said, first seconds after he said it, and multiple times since then. But this is a moment that, no matter what, the internet would not forget, and would double down on every time Phil said something controversial. As somebody who had never played Fez, and had only heard of Phil Fish for supposedly being an asshole before this video, I can confidently now say, I'm a fan. Was Phil Fish completely innocent in all the hate he received? No way! But he didn't hurt anyone, or commit any crimes. And celebrities in the last decade have done a lot worse than that. And if Fez 2 ever does release, I'm buying it. But not for $90.